Brought to you by the Rugby Outlet Mall, equipping you for freedom and connection through rugby. Find out more at rugbyoutletmall.com.
Yo, what's really good, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of ROOTS Rugby. My name is GiftTime Bailu, and I am so happy for another week. It's getting kind of hot out here. August, this will be the first episode of August, second episode of August, something like that. And it's definitely feeling like August. Like, the sad part is we still don't know if we're going to be able to. It doesn't look like we're going to be having fall rugby. It's looking more and more like we're pushing things up to the spring. So it's going to be an incredibly stuffed spring. I mean, stuffed. Rugby 15s, rugby 7s, football, basketball. Yo, it's going to be the mix. Some other sports, I mean, I don't know. Well, look, I am so happy for you guys to be here. This is the podcast where we speak with people about the opportunities they've found, interacted with, or have found engagement through via rugby. And we got a great guest coming on for this week, Derek Lipscomb of Old Blue Rugby. But even more importantly, this guy is the co-founder, one of the co-founders of ROOTS Rugby, and he has actually even found his own company, The Work, which is a racial literacy resource for anyone wanting to get involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can actually go to thework.education. And this is, I mean, when you talk about a guy who is the perfect example of wanting to speak truths, put truth into action, and being able to essentially just back up what is being said. This was a really great interview. This was a really great discussion. I don't even want to call it an interview. It was a great discussion that we ended up having. I really appreciated it through. And especially, and it wasn't even planned this way, that we had this on the wake of this Jersey Rugby Union, Empire Union, Crystal Cook situation that's going on in the U.S. rugby world. I mean, I don't know how much. Actually, you know what? I can talk as much as I want about it. I don't have any legal recourse on it. But essentially what has happened was an issue of a player that was basically assaulted off the field by their coach, but the context of it is based off the fact of whether or not there was inebriation on the field or not, which led to a whole series of actions from transfers, suspensions. Like, this is something straight out of a movie. And so it's really interesting. If you want to be able to take a look at it more, you can actually probably go to CC Cookie on CCOOKEY on Instagram and get the article. I think it's a truth.serum article, and then kind of just build off from there. Whatever's happening behind the scenes, I mean, it's gotten real. It's gotten real, and it just goes to continue the discussion on trying to make sure that we are able to not just discern our biases, but also to make sure that we are putting things or doing the right statutes that prevent either that thought process to not be there or to prevent it from even happening to begin with. So, I mean, I don't know how much you guys will know. I guess I really don't want to talk that much about it because we got a whole podcast about something that works within the field. But, U.S. Rugby world has had a very interesting summer, to say the least. So, COVID 2020 has provided many storylines, nonetheless. So, for the meantime, I hope you guys enjoy this. And also, we still got sponsors, Rugby Outlet Mall, where we're trying to be able to supply you for freedom and network through rugby, keeping you equipped for it. Guys, go on, Grow Rugby for 20% off, GREAUX Rugby, 2 words, for 20% off all Rugby Outlet official gear. That's under HBCU Rugby Classic, where we have the HBCU Rugby Classic shirt, black flag and all, as well as for all the GiftTime Rugby gear, as well as some of the other gears that we're going to have coming on. And you guys stay tuned because it's going to be real, and that this coupon code is going to be very helpful. And it's only for those who have taken the time to listen. And also, I want to add that you guys check out the movie Singapore to Tokyo any way we can. Hit it up on redearthfilms.vhx.tv, a great documentary to take us back to the pure time of 2019, where we weren't thinking about COVID, where we could travel and see what rugby was really about, going through Southeast Asia on the way to the Rugby World Cup and the journey that these two guys have to take. In all full disclosure, I'm one of those guys. So put that in there. But significantly, I suggest checking it out. $17, 7 episodes, 20 minutes per episode. It's well worth the cost, and you'll definitely come out wanting to do more and be able to experience more in rugby if you haven't experienced it outside of the country. And if you have, then it just doubles down on what you have. So, and also, I keep saying and also, please check out some of these other podcasts that we have. Please leave a review, leave a rating. We really appreciate it on Apple iTunes. We're trying to get the numbers up. It allows people to be able to help find us, and it gives me a better idea of what it is that you guys are looking for and what you guys have found interesting in this. I appreciate everybody who has been listening. And without further ado, also, you guys can find the full videos on YouTube, youtube.com/GiftTime Rugby Network. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Derek Lipscomb, the work, Old Blue Rugby, and Roots Rugby. Check it out.
Grow rugby, 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 grow rugby.
Welcome, everybody, to another great episode of Grow Rugby. I got another Super V, Super I, Super P person with us, even though that's kind of redundant, PP person, it's whatever. With us today, this man is a star with New York's Old Blue Rugby. If you guys have watched him in any of the club rugby tournaments, you've seen him dominating at 12, dominating at 13, you know. Add to that, this man's an educator, and he's already run a website, created a whole information panel called The Work to help you with racial literacy. Man, this man is a renaissance man of all sorts. Derek Lipscomb, I'm sorry. I take down sometimes. Derek, man, thanks for coming through, bro.
No, thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate it. It's so great to be here.
So I gotta always say, I always like telling people whenever I first saw people, and the first time I actually heard of you was because of Ryan Ginty, and it was watching, I think, one of his pieces. It was one of his pieces that he did about Old Blue initially.
Yeah. His cover for the summer.
Exactly. And so I'm like watching it, and I'm like, yo, I remember seeing this dude on Rugby Sevens tournaments, but I was like, I never knew who this was. And then I'm like, oh, it's one of the few times where you see a congregation of black people, and brother, you stand out from the rest.
I feel like I've been there for so long.
Right? It's just like, all right, man, let's just go. I was like, all right. I don't know what this guy brings, but this dude seems like he's like a beast, but he seems really nice off the field. So, of course, the random connection of things of the rugby world slowly bring all these pieces. So there's Ginty, and then obviously KG ends up coming into the play. And then I'm like, wait, so they all can. I was like, I don't know what's going on with this New York thing, but yo, let's see this. And then I learned you're an educator, and I'm like, all right, this dude is an enigma on top of a mystery.
I just like, keep showing up, you know. I'm just somewhere in the shadows, just breathing, you know. And it's funny just because like having been with Old Blue now for what are we at, year 9, going on year 9 now.
Nice.
I'm at the point where I've got like folks that like high school kids that came up through play rugby now off the like through high school and finished college, and now they're looking at joining Old Blue, and I'm just like, I can't be that old. It couldn't have happened this way.
Yo, it hits so weird it hits in the weirdest way where you're just like, wait. Am I really at that point? Am I that guy right now?
Exactly. And you're just, and they're like, yeah, you know, when I was born in like, you know, 98, and I'm like, I'm gonna stop you right there. Stop.
No,
Stop.
we're not.
I can't. And like all I'm missing now at this point is like, you know, the grays and the silver hair, and like, you know, at practice now all I got to do is just like stretch for about 45 to an hour, because you know, going through the drills, I already got that piece down, but they're like, hey Derek, you need you, and I'm like, you know, sitting over there with like huddle over a whiskey glass, like what for? Come on, let's just get it a drinking part. So, but no, it's been a great ride so far, and you know, thankfully I've had, you know, KG by my side. Even playing against him, we've managed to stay in great contact, and having somebody like him kind of just be with you through the process of becoming a rugby player. Like, you know, even like us, we would train. I would take the train up to Iona. He'd pick me up. We'd work out, and like, you know, I live in Brooklyn, so you know that's an hour and a half ride for me.
Yeah.
But like, but you know, just making it just because I know, like, you know, having just somebody with you through this process is always useful. And so we made the time for each other, and now getting a chance to kind of see it manifest with like Roots, for example, is really pretty. It's just really great. And I already know, you know, we're going to be all old and whatnot and sentimental, but I can enjoy it for what it is. I can enjoy it for what it is right now too.
Dude, that's real. Look, I was liking it to the stories that I hear about black comedians from the 90s. And when you talk about them, or even comedians in general, but particularly with black comedians, whenever you listen to them talk and you talk about them in groups, and they're like, yo, I remember when so-and-so before Def Comedy Jams came in, we were doing this and this and this stage, and it's always the same people. And they all rose up together, and then they're all where they are now. You're just like, yo, these are all popping guys, but they knew each other prior because they watched each other develop over the years. Yeah. But for the audience, it was just like, oh no, they came overnight. And so with rugby, it feels like it's been the same way, especially in this last decade era, where I think what I would like to say the greatest level of American rugby growth and total, not just from a field standpoint, but from an industry standpoint altogether, coming in nonprofit organizationally, coming from it for-profit organizationally, and then obviously what we see from a team effort. But because of the rugby world being so small and yet still so large, like we've gotten to see each other be able to just like develop and create and build and be these layering blocks that whenever this thing, I don't like maybe using the word pops off, but whenever the mainstream switch flips over, there's going to end up being this catalog that people are like, oh my God, they came out of nowhere. And it's like, nah, man, this has been like,
if you look deep enough, it'll be, And I even think about like, you know, my first years of playing, like, you know, playing against like Shane Donovan, for example, and like, you know, back when it was old Puget Sound. And like, and like seeing like it become Seattle and then having to be the Saracens and, you know, moving like Sarevi's team and stuff like, but like we've gotten a chance to like, we see each other every single time at nationals, and like, it's always love, but at the same time, you know, you're really getting a chance to kind of like watch another person grow as you simultaneously do that. And,
exactly.
You know, now with the Northeast, just given that it's so tight knit, and you know, so many of us have now been playing for our respective clubs so long. It's kind of it's got the feeling of one large family. Like, you know I can go up to Mystic and have, you know, plenty of friendship there, and like, you know, I know they'd be upset if I even found a hotel. Like, you know, like, bro, stay with me, or you know, being able to cut it. But you can also go, you know, even at this point with some of the guys at Nyack, just from playing against them for so long. You know, regardless of what the old boys constantly tell us, like, you know, and I'm more than certain I could find a blade in my rib cage if, you know, I speak on Nyack in a positive manner. But like, you know, we've gotten a chance to really like grow together, and it's just it's really awesome to see, because you can't really recognize it in the moment, you know, 7-8 years ago. But, you know, now that you're kind of over that hump, and you really are in a space where, you're doing well on and off the field, you can really kind of take away a lot of great moments in the past and have your own like ESPN classic reels going in your head about some of the matchups that, we've had over the years.
Dude, that is it exactly. I liked what you touched on. I kind of wanted to transition into this, especially as your start within rugby, because everybody's obviously within the American lexicon. We all have a very unique, but also there's a slight bit of a shared experience when it comes to how we got into rugby. For you, what was your entrance in to rugby initially?
Yeah. So when I got into when I got into Colombia back in 2007, I was slated to play football and kind of go about it that way. And I for anybody that's listening, like if anybody knows the Ivy League football schedule, it's very sparse. You play 10 games. You don't have any playoffs. There are no bowl games. You're largely there to get an education, and that's it. And so you have 10 games, and then, with the spring, I'm not sure how they do it now, but back when I was playing, the spring practices were largely like, morning workouts, and then I think they give you somewhere between 12 and 15 practices between January and May. And then you'd have the spring game at the end of all of it. And, if you're trying to keep in shape, it was just really difficult to kind of go all the way up to Bakerfield when the main campus is on 116th and you've got to travel up to 218th on the subway on your own time to find time to train and stuff like that. And so now they've got like shuttles, but like back when I was there, if you really wanted to get after it, like you had to find the time and the space to do it. And so, with rugby, it was just more continuous, and like, the story between like me and football and transitioning to rugby was that, for the most part, I would go to practice, I'd do everything I needed to do, but in terms of playing time, it was just sparse. And so, I spoke with the coaches, I talked about what I needed to do, and I wanted to come in as a safety, but at 220 pounds, I was too heavy for an Ivy League safety. So
especially for 2007 at the time, whenever it was.
Right.
And like safety trying to attempt like that big safety, you essentially were what, 5 years too early for that kind of big safety style.
Yeah. And like, the folks I looked up to, Ed Reed, Brian Dawkins, like, Taylor Mays and Sean Taylor, like, those dudes are like 225, but they're in the NFL. But like, those are people that I'm aspiring to be. I got to hit these numbers. I got to be able to lift this much. And, not understanding that within the context of the Ivy League, like 185 pounds is essentially what you want your safety to be at that level. And so I'm coming in from their perspective, 40 pounds overweight. And so, once you move into linebacker, you got to learn a slightly different scheme and things like that. And, I did it, and they transitioned me around a bit, but I wasn't really feeling like I found my footing enough. And so I was on the floor with I was friends with a few guys that were already rugby players. And so they had been to the games, and Colombia is not known for its winning. And so they were trying to console me and just like, just come out and like, just come to a few practices and just see where you get. And there's a lot of like overlap in terms of what you need to know about like rugby as it relates to football. And so it didn't really feel like, I was making a huge leap there. And so the cool thing about that was that it was year round. And so, they had the practices, they had like trainings and things like that. And you have to take the subway to get up to the practice field, but like your games were all throughout the year. And so for me, at least, like that feeling of being able to like work towards something was great. And so I still remember the day that like, I decided, cause you can't do two sports at an Ivy League school. You're asking for your GPA to suffer. And so,
I was going to say, is it because they say you can't, or is it just the workload?
Yeah. And like in your standard day for football, usually you're done around 6:30 and like you've had dinner and like, you've already watched tape and stuff like that. And practice for rugby would pick up at like 7:30. And so for me, while I was doing both, I would just stay at the field and just wait for the rugby guys to show up and continue on. And so, as I kind of got more like found my footing there, I realized that like, there's a lot there in terms of like going where you're needed. And so for me, at least, it didn't really feel like Columbia football needed somebody like myself. Whereas like Columbia rugby was in a space where it's like, we need somebody that's really going to be able to help us kind of grow this program and work with us even off the field. And so, our first tournament, funny enough, was in Trinidad.
Nice.
And that was really like the first time I'd been out of the country. And so,
Nice.
I get my passport and getting a chance to play over there. And, Hayden James, was the coach at the time, and getting a chance to know him and really develop a relationship with him. And just really like, I guess, like kind of getting the base in terms of learning how to like interact with people that like you can learn from. And
Right.
like how, like for me at least, growing up, like you don't really get a lot of experience like being able to attach yourself to people that can really teach you and want to invest time
Because
to
typically
watch you grow.
it's something that you have to do from an internal. It's you're willing yourself to get to find that spot, but not typically there's not that person to be able to attach you, and you're like, okay, I can confirm, and
Exactly. And so like, and I like, BJ Weber was also there, and Sean too. And, those are guys that like in Ray Cornbill, who's, a famous Eagle himself, and being able to be surrounded by that much expertise at one point, like I didn't recognize it at the time, but like those guys are already trying to make sure that I had everything I needed to like put myself in a leadership position. And so by the time our senior year rolled around, they're like, we were ranked, we're getting looked at by, I think it was called Rugby Today at the time, like that old magazine.
Former, what was now Rugby Magazine, which is now nothing.
And so, but like, at the time, like if you got recognized by them, like, that was top notch for a program. And, here's Columbia still managing to find its way, like, and of course Dartmouth is wiping the floor with all of us, but, they've got like a legitimate program, and we're aspiring to something like that. And being able to just kind of get recognized, to get close to it, was just an accomplishment for us. And so, but all while that's happening, Old Blue is still like looking at who they can have come from Columbia to join the team. And so that's how I got a chance to kind of immediately be meshed in with some of those guys, and get a chance to kind of get involved early on with Old Blue. And so as soon as the 7 stuff picked up, that was largely something I had taken to, just because I was in shape for it.
Right.
But they were also in the space, and that's where, Steve Lewis comes into focus there, and really helping me kind of develop those skills further, helping me to aspire to reach the Eagles and stuff like that, and get involved in that process. And so, looking back again, like you get a chance to kind of understand that it's got to be, a team effort in terms of your own growth. Like there's some stuff that you can do for yourself, but, at the very least, like there has to be at least, 2 or 3 people that you can kind of go to in earnest and be like, what do I need to work on to get better on and off the field? And at that point, I was a captain for Columbia. And so making the transition into club rugby, where you now have to take a lot more orders. Right. Yeah. And you're starting from more or less square one. You do have to learn how to like re-humble yourself and recognize that this is a big open space, and club rugby is nothing like college, and kind of making that transition. And so, but even still, like being in that space was very different, because it meant that I was ascribing to a different culture now, and having to kind of manifest there. And so because there aren't a lot of Black players at the time when I joined, you're kind of feeling your way out what it means to be Black on this team. And for the most part, like, because New York City's pretty progressive, I felt like the players themselves were also pretty progressive
within that same culture.
Exactly. And so funny enough, our first sevens team had KG on it. Nice. And so that's where he and I got a chance to kind of meet each other. And then he went and left us. So KG, if you're listening to this, this is all of your fault. He left us and went to Nyack. to try and start a life there. And I know it's really just because it was closer in proximity to him.
No excuses.
But exactly.
Kyle,
I'm not
no
letting him off the
excuses,
hook. We had so many years that could have been great together, but no, it's fine. But then, like, you know, that's where Mike St. Clair comes in because, like, we play Long Island, and I got a chance to play him when even like when he was playing for Stony Brook and stuff. And you start to see, like, in my own mind, like, all the, like, pieces starting to come together. And then I'm just like, I know I'm not leaving. So one way or another, we got to get you guys back here.
Do what we got to do.
Like LeBron a little bit. Right. I'm like whispering to him after the games, like, you know, this black and blue really would look great on you. All you got to do is just come on. Yeah.
It's looking mighty familiar. Like, that's some championship colors right there, right? Won't you like some championship colors?
Exactly. So I felt like Prince in the Dave Chappelle skit where I've got the aura behind me and I'm just like motioning them to come closer. So and in due time, you know, funny enough, like I felt like once they came, you know, little by little, we would get like other guys. So like, you know, we get Phil eventually, and we get Gavin, who was playing up in Boston, and you know, and Connor Wallace, and
steady recruiting.
So before you know it, you look around and you've got like Ginty with a camera, and he's just like, "So how'd you get here?" And I'm just looking around like, if I could really tell you, I would, but right now I really don't know. So, but I think, you know, it's really about how well you can kind of give off the vibe that, like, you know, we want to be able to grow. We want to see you do well. We're going to band together. Even if you're on a different team, I want to see you be able to succeed. And, you know, I'm going to be right behind you, applauding you. You know, and on the field, you know, we're gonna go as hard as we need to, because that's gonna be the best gauge of our abilities.
Of course.
But we'll get a chance to share that experience afterwards too. So,
dude, that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
Dude, there's something I keep notice even in as you were telling the story, is the propensity towards one, high achievement. Obviously, being Ivy League is a very big marker on that, but I take it that even came before. And then the other propensity is towards leadership, the quickness of being able to be a captain for that Colombia team, especially coming off of the football team and coming off of an early start. For you, prior to your college years, like, was the environment that you had one that allowed you to develop high achievement, or is it something that you've always innately had, or like what was the basis that comes from that?
I think, like, you know, having you know, my parents and you know, my mom, like, so I grew up in Cincinnati, and you know, my mom, like, did a great job of just trying to expose us in terms of, she wanted to be authoritative, not authoritarian. So, like, give me the space,
but intention.
Exactly.
Hit you with intention, but allow you to be able to figure it out from there.
Exactly. And you know, she was just like, you know, whatever it is, you, at the end of the day, you gotta do what makes you happy. And my father, who lived in Virginia Beach, like, he was more towards the, like, technical side of this. So let's think of the logistics that are kind of going through your thought processes, and think about, like, you know, who's being affected by your decision making, and really thinking about, you know, more unit based type learning. And it's like, I think his military background kind of gives him that perspective a lot of times, and being able to analyze it that way. And when you mesh the two of them, they're both outspoken, but in different ways.
Right.
And so for me, at least, kind of finding my footing there with them meant that, you know, we had to have some really honest conversations about what I needed to do to kind of, like, in this case, like, become a great football player. And, like, you know, I had my sister as well, who was incredibly smart and gifted. And, like, you could always get, you know, a brutally honest answer from her if you felt like the parents weren't going to give it to you, right? And so, but, like, you know, with that being said, both my parents were also pretty honest. And so they're coming into the space where it's just like, if you truly want to be able to do as great as you can, then you have to be able to take the criticism that comes with it.
Right.
And, you know, they put me in a space where it's just like, if you're trying to strive to be the best on, say, your football team, your high school football team, that means that you're going to have some honest conversations about where you are on the field if you don't feel like you're being represented properly, or really kind of going after colleges that you want to be able to approach for a D1 like football scholarship. And so funny enough, that led to me applying to North Carolina, Florida State, University of Georgia, and getting a chance to talk to those teams and like being open and honest, like, hey, I'm coming out of North College Hill in Cincinnati. If y'all need a tape or anything, like being vulnerable, but also understanding that the onus is on me to be able to show you that I want to be able to do this.
Wait, so was it you that actually reached out to them, or was it your coaches? Did they scout you? Like, what was that? Because even in that honest conversation, there's a lot that you're developing out from that.
Yeah, and like I think North College Hill wasn't a huge school. It's not a big football program there. Like, but at the same time, we were really great. Like, we were doing really great things there, and we had some really great coaches. I even point out, like, Coach Nathaniel Snow, for example, who was he was every sport I played, he was involved somehow. So like he and I got a chance to kind of develop that relationship. He was another person that would take off time, like on his own time on weekends, and bring us to like football camps and like drive us all over Wild Blue Yonder to kind of get us exposure. And it would just be like a crew of like 4 or 5 of us. And like that 4 or 5 of us really did want to be able to play D1. And so he would just be like, all right, like hop in the truck. Like, we're going to go out to like Kent State this weekend, or we're going to go up to Akron, or, we're going to go to Miami, where he played football. And, we're just going to kind of bang it out. If you want to do this, this is the game. And so him offering his time to be able to kind of help us grow in that space is definitely respected. But he was another person that says you got to put yourself out there. And so that meant going up to those scouts and like saying like, hey, I know you're here to watch, these players, but just letting you know, like, my GPA is great. Like, I'm doing everything I can, outside of the field to kind of get better. And as a result, like, I got scholarships to be able to play for those D1 schools. And every single one I applied for, I got in. But then that's where I also set my sights on, like, could I get into an Ivy League school?
Right.
And so I applied out to Harvard, Penn, Yale, and Columbia. And Penn and Columbia both gave the best prospects in terms of playing time, but then also because you can't get an athletic scholarship to those schools, it has to be an academic one. You had to be able to prove yourself through writing samples and what have you. I'm not sure what the process is now, but basically it meant that, like, they said, if you want to, like, here's the like financial aid package where they included, a few scholarships, and then you just got to apply for the rest of it. And like I managed to like apply for scholarships, get all that stuff covered, and walk into Columbia not having to worry about debt, which really was able to kind of get me on the right foot. And so
that's
with
a huge leg up even after the fact.
Yeah. And like, and I think like both my parents are a great testament to just being able to say that, like, this is the fruit that you need to bear, that needs to bear at this point. And, all we want you to be able to do is just kind of keep chipping away at trying to be the best part of yourself that you can be. And so, like, having that kind of support and being surrounded by people that want to be able to support you in that manner definitely helped me with just finding my own voice. But even more so, it still has to be developed somehow. And so finding, a new set of people that are going to help you develop that voice is just paramount to being able to watch, like, my own growth as a person, but then also as a rugby player too.
Right. So there's always been that natural proclivity to be able to even find mentorship as well. Because a lot of people, like, I know for me, it's always been a problem. Like, my parents were great, gave me a lot of my foundation. And so most of my attachment came off of them. And then there might be people that helped along the way, but I don't always know if I would always call them mentors, because I had a natural inclination to just want to fight my way to do it. Mind you, then
Yeah.
flop horribly.
But that's the learning process.
Right? But, you know, it still was like, okay, we're kind of piecemealing it, but there wasn't necessarily always a stable people outside of my own nuclear family. So
Yes.
for you to be able to say that you were able to find people in mentorship, one, shows a level of vulnerability that you were able to tap into in an early stage, and two, the awareness of wanting to be able to, or needing to be able to use people to help your development and your growth from there.
Yeah. And I would even say, like, there's a certain amount of self-sufficiency there that I think, you know, those folks that want to be able to see you grow want to see from you too. Like,
of course,
they can
base
definitely help, or at least be able to like, you know, give you a few guides here and there. But at the end of the day, it really is just you that has to be able to kind of see it all the way through. So, like, you know, they're not going to be able to go with you to the field every time you work out, or, you know, they're not going to be in the weight room with you, you know, as you try and like throw on another plate or something like that. But you've got to be able to kind of have that conversation and go to what, like, you know, is called the dark place, you know, and being able to kind of handle some of the anxieties that come with that growth.
Right.
What if I fail? What happens? Like, you know, what are my contingency plans that go from that? And, you know, I had to go there for myself when, you know, the Eagles setup didn't really work out for me.
Right.
And, you know, I was commuting. They would fly me over for the camps, and, you know, I'd try to work out to get onto one of the travel squads. But, you know, I do think that not being there physically in San Diego does have an effect.
I mean, look, it's a direct access right there. Proximity is always going to be an advantage.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and as that door, again, as I'm thinking about, like, what are my next steps? What can I do? That's when the prospect of being able to play overseas showed up. And so, like, you know, I could get my master's. I could go play for Blackheath, because that's where the coach
Blackheath is in London?
Yep, in London. And so that's where, you know, Mike was kind of getting involved. Mike Friday was getting involved already with them. And so he'd let me know, because, again, seeking out, you know, what do I need to do? How can I develop further? You know, he was just like, well, what if I talk to some folks over at Blackheath and see if we can't work something out? And, like, you know, that's the first time I played, like, professionally, like, because they paid me. And, you know, I'd use that money to pay for my master's education over at University College London. And after a while, you realize that, like, that's a level that I wouldn't be able to experience over in America. So getting a chance to play that was already a step above to where I would have been if I decided to States. Exactly. And so, you know, not to mention, during that time, I really got a chance to really develop my education in terms of really what I wanted to do, what I wanted to see next, and kind of plot out what I wanted my own academic career to look like too. And so finding that balance between sports and academics, you know, was crucial, even though I was only there for only about 10 months. And so,
but still, it's a massive. There's so much that's being compiled into that proverbial short period of time that you get from that.
Yeah. And, like, meeting some great folks over there too. And, you know, getting a chance to really, like, develop myself, like, as a rugby player, know, like, what I'm really good at, know what I've got to get better at. And this is a completely different set of people. So they don't know me. They don't know anything I've been up to over in the States. And, you know, you're wiping the slate clean and kind of seeing, you know, kind of just where can you place yourself, and kind of challenging yourself to, like, really focus on getting better, so that when you come back to the States, you're an asset on multiple fronts. And, you know, that was the mission back in 2016 when I came back, to make sure that, you know, I was making myself as present as possible. And that meant that, like, you know, even just rolling into the because as soon as I got back, sevens was starting right back up.
Right.
And so we rolled right back into it again. And you know, this was like the end of Dominic Waring's, like, time as a player, and he was moving into being a coach. And he was another person that I continually kind of look at as somebody that's, like, kind of just got it all together, and kind of just moving, and can kind of, like, easily move between, leadership, rugby, and administration and stuff like that. And so, watching him kind of make the transition into being a coach meant that I needed to transition into being a leader now for Old Blue Sevens,
Right.
and like kind of get myself into that space. And, and it's kind of weird how like, you kind of find yourself in the same shoes as I was at Colombia.
I was about to say it was almost resonating the exact same, and I was actually gonna say if even what you were studying from school helped play into that, because as you're doing the balance between football and academics in Colombia before going rugby to academics in Colombia, you're already doing a transition and you're already creating getting notable awareness. But then to be able to do this again from an international standpoint, not only is it as a rugby player, not only is it as a student, but now as an international, an expat, if you may. You have these new perspectives that adds in. So before I touch on the perspectives, what were you studying when you were at Colombia and then subsequently when you were at University of London?
Yeah, University College London.
College London.
Yeah. So like at Columbia, and I didn't do the pre-med setup, but I did neurosci and like development. So I was focused on how people learned, what they learned, why they learned it, and looking at it from a biological standpoint, and then kind of shifting into going into teaching how like kids learn and how to become a really great educator in that space, and like really thinking about the pedagogical side from it, and like not just standing up at the front of the class and lecturing, but rather like what can I do, whether it be to really kind of mesh it and really make a holistic experience for the kids, but then also for myself too. And so I got to get a chance to relive being a kid again a bit, as I thought about like, what's the best way to kind of learn this lesson, or can we do a read aloud here and then break out into groups and then really get on our hands and knees and kind of act out, some of these lessons too. And so if you can imagine my big grown self crawling around with, second graders at the time, it's a good chance to kind of relive some of those experiences, but then think about how we can kind of mold it to be a little bit more special for them too. And so wanting to kind of expound upon that, that's what brought me to University College London, and kind of really diving in to like the psychology behind education. And then at that point, I was already starting to get into some of the racial literacy stuff. I'd already been doing a lot of the research for it. So then thinking about where does the conversation about race diverge from, our standard education, and why do we kind of want to like stray away from that conversation as it comes to children or as it comes to teachers, and really thinking about how can we incorporate that conversation into, a classroom space that allows for, honest conversations to happen, but then also like a great deal of growth. And, again, just trying to mesh all the different spheres that, I've been in into one space, because I do think that would create a little bit more like uniformity for me. But at the same time, like the hat that I'm taking off and putting on becomes the same hat.
It's now we're just looking at different sides of the brim as opposed to looking at different folds of the hats, different styles of hats.
Exactly. So really just kind of under like helping people understand that like these don't have to be separate. They can really be the same, and they can be balanced in a way that doesn't feel like it's overwhelming to one person. And it just requires that, you really are able to, I guess, more or less be vulnerable in those spaces for that critical feedback, so you can get to a place where that you're good on all fronts.
I was thinking like, whenever you spoke in that, I always think within the rugby field itself, in an area where you have to be able to understand exactly the connection, because we're, to one extent, it's a predictive nature as it is a reactive nature. So like within the rugby space, if you're trying to understand how to explain to a person during practice, hey, I need you to be here, where maybe in another sport, like even with football, we know that this is the play, this is what the play is supposed to do, and then we will mission react to what is being presented, but this is our baseline. versus within rugby, you're already taking it off from what's already being presented to you. So you need the person to already have a kind of stable understanding of who you are and exactly how they're understanding and seeing awareness in the game. Did that even kind of like, when you started working on that within school and especially being able to learn more exponentially with it, were you able to maybe improve or see a difference in how you were looking at the game and subsequently how you presented it to your teammates?
Yes. And like, I think being a teacher really did help with my leadership abilities on the field. And, you know, I can imagine that teammates could definitely, you know, just describe for you what the feeling is whenever I come into a space to have to talk. And, you know, and you know, modeling vulnerability here, I was an absolute asshole when I first became a captain for Colombia, because I felt like, you know, we got to do these things and there's like no excuses. You just have to do it. And, you know, I'm thinking like, you know, that's the rough cut nature of like being in a leadership position, but not understanding that like, from an emotional perspective, all players do feel, every single one of them, and all of them are doing everything that they can to be able to put themselves in the best position to be able to win. And so when something does not go right, they're probably already on themselves more so than you could ever be. But with that being said, you getting into this space does not help them if it's not constructive. And I thought about that a lot in terms of like in the classroom, a kid is trying to do everything they can be like to be a great student. And so if they get a math problem wrong, you can't be in the space to like start. Right.
How dare you get this wrong?
And exactly. And so like, you know, you think about like their development really does have to do a lot with like how you talk to them and like how like, you know, if you really want them to love math and they might not love it at the moment, you really have to like scaffold it for them in a way that like shows that like you're not going to get everything right, but that's the beauty of learning itself. And like how like rugby is the same way, like you're not going to get everything right, but like in so many ways, you guys have already proven that you can do everything necessary to be able to win a game. And so all we need to do is just find the formula to be able to kind of do it consistently. And so, and just like with students in the classroom, like once you find that formula and you can do it consistently, then you get more comfortable with it. And then you get into a space where I might ask you, teach that other person to be able to do that. So now I've pushed you into a leadership role after just, you know, just last week, you were just trying to figure out what to do for fractions, but now you're talking about it to another student and having to lead it there. And so rugby works the same way. Now that you can pass off the left, or now that you can like run this play, take these kids or take this group of guys over here and run this same setup like as you see it, because my perspective might not be the best one for them, but you might have a different viewpoint in that space. And so before you know it, you've got folks now, you've got a cohort of leaders that are able to kind of give constructive feedback. They trust one another to be able to be critical with each other. And now all of a sudden you have a culture that largely kind of stems from wanting to like see everybody grow. That's not to say it's not competitive still, but it is in a space where like everybody wants to be able to see the other person get better.
Well, I would even say it seems like it would actually even be more so competitive because now, but it's just not from a negative standpoint. It's not competitive in the nature of I need to diminish or this person needs to be crushed, as opposed to, okay, I want to see how this person goes at the highest, then go from there and see how further I can go. And it really becomes a true definition of iron sharpening iron on it.
Yes. And I think like, you know, we developed that relationship both like interpersonally within Old Blue, but then intrapersonally between the teams that we would always play with, like on that 7th circuit, for example. So we knew, for example, like in that semifinal round, we were going to see somebody like Nyack, we were going to see Mystic, whatever iteration of Connecticut, you know, that we had, because they changed their name all the time, but we knew that would be the other team that would show up. And over time, we recognized that like in order to be able to play at the highest level, i.e. go to nationals and actually do something there, not be at the bottom of the bucket there, that means that we really have to go after it every single weekend. And like the Northeast 7 schedule at its peak was 7 tournaments or 6 tournaments, and the 7th being nationals. And like it is an absolute grind to play 5 to 6 games every Saturday throughout the summer, and like have to still figure, and like, you know, at its peak, you couldn't tell who was actually going off to nationals until like more or less that final week.
Right.
And so it got down to like, eventually it would be like, all right, these two teams, and I'm going to pat ourselves on the back. Old Blue has been first every year,
Nice.
but it's not as if, you know, it has been like a clean sweep. You know, we had that one year where we went undefeated, but like it was not an easy
grind.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of knockdown dragouts every single, like, you know, we always laugh at each other because we see on the 7th circuit, the HSBC 7th circuit, when a player gets a break, you know, they get to trot in to the try line, like, you know, the fans are cheering and whatever. They can wave to everybody.
20 meters is usually just empty.
You know, they've broken away, and you know, and the fact is that it just does not exist for Northeast Sevens, right? You make a break, you better believe somebody is huffing and puffing the entire way to make sure that like you run in the whole way. And so that really meant that you're going to finish every play that you set up. And so that mentality going to 7, like into nationals, really helped Old Blue in terms of understanding that, like, look, man, like nobody's going to give you any easy buckets here. And like, you got to understand that like, this has got to be the way it is, just because like, you're not going to gain respect from anybody. And even though Old Blue might be able to carry a certain amount of respect on the field, it means nothing. And so you have to start from square one every single time that you kick off. And I think really embedding that into the players really just kind of helped understand that like, we have to be in it together in order for this to work. And so like, I think kind of growing from that, given that, you know, this would be technically the first year Old Blue didn't go to nationals because we don't have 7s, gave us a time to really like, or at least gave me a time to really reflect on like, you know, what makes a team really great. And I do think that like leadership is one piece, but trust has to be like, they have to be able to trust that you are going to be able to say and do what you are going to do. And like developing that trust takes time, and you cannot yell at folks until, you know, they get it, but you really do have to like work on those like personal relationships for them to be able to understand where you're coming from.
And I feel like that always ends up being the thing. Like, you know, we always know that certain actions have their purpose in place. But I think over time, whenever people start to see one single action, they start to mimic on that because that's what is the belief, as opposed to it being a multiple layered concept. So if it's like, hey, I'm yelling at somebody, the yelling should not be the base of it. The yelling is to be able to get up a level, not to berate and diminish. Whereas the interpersonal relationship allows at least the trust to occur, to know that it's coming from a good place. It's not coming from a place of spite, to say the least. So, you know, so it does create a complex communication skill. And I think even for that, you start to look at that within coaches. For you, have you looked at it? Obviously, you look at it within child development as a teacher. But as coaches, as mentors, I guess, but particularly as coaches, do you start to see that there has, maybe not has been, but there is kind of an example of these more adjusted, complex usage where it's like nobody's too passive on one way, but they're not so super aggressive. And if they are, they're kind of finding themselves in the middle or within the development that way. Yeah,
and I think like, you know, some of the best coaching I've received has been one where like you don't focus on necessarily the volume of the message, but rather the message itself. Right. And so like, there's been time, like, you know, and I'll take Hayden, for example, somebody that's been in my rugby career my entire life. Like the entire time I played rugby, he's been involved there. And like, you know, there have been times where he's raised his voice at me. But it's coming from a place that like you've got to be able to see what I see right now. And like, while I feel like, you know, like what you need to do, I'm actually giving you a different viewpoint here that might be able to push you into a different space. And like understanding that like being a leader actually means that you're listening a lot more than you're speaking. And if you're taking that space, even from a coaching standpoint, where you constantly need to lecture every single time that something comes up, you're going to find yourself exhausted, but even more so, like, they're not going to be self-sufficient.
Right. Because it's just dependency on what it is that you're saying and looking for that voice to constantly confirm it versus just being able to create that own pattern itself.
For yourself, right. And so, like, if you can't get to a point where you can be trusted to make a decision on the field, and the coach can't put you in that position to be able to make that decision, then by all means, the coach isn't doing enough there to be able to really get you in a space to grow. And so if you have 15 players that are all hoping to, like, do exactly as the coach says, with no interplay there, with no ability to finesse or no ability to kind of put their own, like, emotion into their playing style, then it'll come off as prescribed. And then, like, teams immediately can see that, like, you know, there's going to be no variation there. And so, like, as from a teaching standpoint, again, like, in the classroom, I can't expect that every kid is going to do things the exact same way that I taught it. And, like, now as a reading specialist, for example, like, I work with kids who are still developing their reading skills and still trying to get the comprehension spaces down and really trying to, like, you know, I'm working with little kids. So a lot of them are wanting to get into reading Harry Potter and reading, like, you know, the huge chapter books, but they're just not there yet. And so you see, just like with rugby, they're aspiring to be Eagles or they're aspiring to be really excellent readers, but we have to do some of the basic stuff first. And we have to do that a lot just so that you know that that's going to become something that's innate for you, that it doesn't take any thought process. It is just quite literally, I pick up a book or I pick up a ball. This is what I need to do. This is how I need to kind of go over these skills with myself. And then, you know, from a coaching or teaching standpoint, now I'm going to push you a little bit further each time. And so it might feel uncomfortable at first because you're learning something new or you're learning how to do something that you've never done before, but eventually you'll be open to just kind of knowing new things, knowing new genres of books, for example, or knowing different playing styles or knowing different players, to where all of a sudden now, like, just become more versatile. And that versatility really does translate itself in so many different spaces. And, like, even I think for myself, how I can play flanker, or I'll play wing, or I'll play center. And there'll be games where, you know, I have a laugh that, like I'll be at wing, for example, and then a player will go down, or there will be a substitution needing to be made. And I'm like, yo, Derek, we need you a lock. And, like, and I'm like, I don't have any tape for my ears, as small as they may be, but, like, let's do it. Like, you know, and, you know, thinking about how, like, a team can trust you to play a very pivotal position like that. But it also, like, knowing that, like, you know, that's a skill that, you know, I do need to be able to cherish, as much as I might hate having to stuff my head between two props' asses, or, you know, the hooker and the prop, having to, like, stuff my head there and then just be like essentially compressed, when all, like, just no more than 5 minutes ago I was on the wing, and, you know, when the ball came I could just finish the play. Exactly. But now I'm down and dirty. But having that ability to just kind of waltz between those two and be trusted to do that, speaks to the coaching as well. And, like, say, we can let Derek know that these are some of the things that we need you to do. And, like, knowing that, like, from a team player perspective and as a leader, you got to be able to just say, like, all right, I'm going to do it as best I can, but I'm going to need some help to kind of know, you know, how to be excellent at these positions. And so, you know, I think the more that players can kind of see that, the more likely it'll be that, like, players will raise their hand and say, like, you know, I'm not entirely comfortable playing hooker, for example, but, you know, if I can develop my throwing skills, then, you know, if you guys need another hooker, even though I'm playing center, for example, I can go over and play. Right. And so, getting to a space where, like, rugby can be more holistic in that respect, and get some really great players out of it too.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And it kind of leads me into, like, where you guys started with ROOTS Rugby, and kind of, obviously, there's several things that you, KG, Kyle Granby, Tiana Granby, and Kamani Davis were able to do whenever you guys were putting this together. But
Right.
you know, how was kind of as you go into how that all started, was this thought process, this theory now creating execution that you're seeing in the classroom a little bit, you're seeing obviously with on the field, maybe you're seeing in the classroom more, you're seeing on the field a little bit, but now you have to create a maybe more controlled environment with a much more specific goal in mind. Was that part of the seeds that helped develop this idea for ROOTS Rugby?
Yeah, and I would even say, like, you know, honing in on it, the racial conversation again that I mentioned in the past wasn't necessarily happening in the rugby sphere, and so what you were witnessing was that a lot of players were kind of finding themselves in the same position over and over and over again, and like, you know, and really leaning on the coaches to kind of push their name through to, you know, the upper echelons and being able to be represented. And like, so all of a sudden the power was kind of stripped from, you know, predominantly our black players to be able to play higher level rugby, because there aren't that many avenues to begin with. But they're also, for the avenues that were there, they could be hierarchical. They could be only recognized if you played with this coach or if you played here. And so what we were realizing, and I think all of us kind of came to this understanding at the same time, is that like sometimes you can't be at the table yet. Like you have to create your own table and like set that up and really like make sure that it is cultivated in a way that like they're going to witness our table. They're going to witness our castle being built. Right. And they're going to eventually like ask questions as to why are you building it? Like, you know, what is the reasoning behind it? And really kind of pushing that back on them to think about why we would build this. Think about the reasonings behind why we would have a platform for black players to be able to play in London, to be able to hopefully next year, Kenya, bring us back, please, but to be able to play in Nairobi and like get a chance to like play in Amsterdam Sevens and like think about like how like the development for myself, even going overseas and just having that exposure, like if everybody could get that, or if black players could experience that, what that could do for their game, and like understand that like as it stands right now, there aren't that many avenues for players to be able to do that, especially if you're black and you're constantly playing wing. Then that means that like in the grand scheme of things, we can only take 3 or 4 wings.
Right, exactly, because who can fill it? It's not a space that is going to be turned over enough to be able to fill it. And especially if you're dealing with the forwards and especially the centers, well, just even basically any of the other 14 positions, 13, 14 positions, you there's so much depth that needs to be taken up in those areas alone.
Right. And so like what we recognize is that like if we can manage to give power back to the players in that respect, that actually has a big component. That's a really big growth component of their rugby development, and like understanding, like finding the voice to talk to your coach about like, hey, you know, you've put me at this position, but you know, I really think I might be able to be great at this one. Like, you know, do you have any tips for me to be able to push myself into that space? And really having the coach kind of take a step back and recognizing that like this player wants to try for this thing, rather than shut down that conversation. What resources do I have that can really develop that, so that, you know, they're not looking elsewhere to go play the position that they feel they can play. And so, you know, if, you know, for us, for ROOTS, for at least, if we can kind of bring that development into the 4A, like 4A for those players, that builds their confidence, but then also like the team that they're playing for becomes better as a result, because now, like, you know, they actually have somebody that's true to their position, they're confident there, and they feel like they have something to add to that discussion. And so, like, you know, I know that the conversation, again, around race as it respects to rugby is a very tedious one, but it's something, for me at least, I'm no stranger to, just because I've been doing this for quite some time. And so
it's almost
I know
like a lifetime of work.
and so for me, right, you know, and so for me at least, it's about being able to help coaches, but then also players, like understand that this isn't something that you need to do by yourself, but rather like in order to kind of see your team culture grow, this is something that, you know, you've got to be able to model that vulnerability, just like I would in a classroom, about what it takes to be able to get like players to the next level, and understand that like we want to be able to work with teams. So we want like coaches to be able to reach out and say like, hey, this player needs a little bit more development in this position, but like as it stands right now, like he or she wouldn't get any playing time with the setup. But if he plays with you guys, or he or she plays with you guys, if you guys go over to this tournament, for example, or if you guys play at this like exhibition game, that would be a great way for them to get a barometer on their own skills. And like, you know, we can kind of grow with that player, and like they can get a chance to kind of know like, all right, the bar has been set. This is what I really need to do to get better. And like, you know, that there are going to be people that are going to hold you accountable to make sure that you're doing everything you can to get better. And so, you know, the purpose of Roots is really to be able to not only like have those Black players play at you know, again, the goal is to play for like MLR, the Eagles and stuff like that, and have more representation there. But understanding that process to get there shouldn't be one that is like anxiety inducing or, you know, overtly laborious, but rather like getting them into a space where they want to be able to grow. They're excited to be able to grow, and really kind of get after it there too, and know that like they've got, you know, like just the Roots administration at the very least there to be able to talk to. But now we're starting to see, and you and I both could see there from that panel on Wednesday, that like we already have some folks that are leaders in this conversation too, and could also be tapped on to kind of talk about their experiences as well. And so making it so that it's more of a family, not necessarily an isolated silo, where it's just like, oh, you're wearing the wrong colors, so you obviously can't be with us, but rather like, nah, man, like gates open, come on in, and making sure that they know that they're going to be supported the minute that they both coaches and players, the minute that they reach out.
No, and I think it's one part that I've always found that was very that rugby can be very usable in that factor, because of the fact that regardless of what people have make it be, you do have to have that expendability. And because of rugby's natural place where you should at least have a standard skill across all positions, that you can be able to take advantage of that. One thing that you even pointed at, which obviously you experienced with going to London, was being able to play overseas. And I know for me, being able to, even from the media space, let alone from a performance on-field space, the mere factor of being able to go overseas changes the entire dynamic of how you perceive the game and even culture. And then as a result, it kind of implements, and I think I talked to Farrah Douglas a few episodes ago on this, where it's personality impacts pitch play. And so it's identity impacts, you know, pitch play. And I think that one plays so heavily, like you mentioned, like, you're not just exposing a person to a different dynamic of the game. You're not just exposing a person to a different dynamic of cultures, but you're exposing a person to a wider scope of how the worldview and everything in itself relates to it. You know?
Right. And I think about like, you know, for you in the HBCU, like Rugby Classic, and having those players in that space be able to put themselves in a thought process where, you know, they can see themselves playing overseas. Like they can already start to think about like, you know, there are ways that I can kind of, because like for me at least, rugby has been a great way for me to kind of travel around and see the world. Like, you know, at this point, getting a chance to play in Trinidad, getting a chance to play in like, you know, Paris and Milan, getting the chance to play over in London, and like, you know, like being able to play in these spaces, like not only kind of opens your worldview in terms of like how you see rugby as a culture, but then also how you see yourself as a player. And like how, like when you come back to the States and then you see like, you see everything that's happening, like current events wise, like how like rugby has kind of helped shape your worldview.
Right.
And kind of now, like, you're now in a space where, like, man, I gotta help people kind of understand that, like, you know, we can't move into a more insular space, but rather, like, we got to get into an open space where we do want to talk. Right. And I think, like, it's an honest conversation. It's a difficult conversation, but it's an honest conversation.
No good conversation is easy.
Yeah. And, you know, and I think having more people that want to raise their hand and say, like, you know, again, like, relating it back to rugby, just like I'm a center and I can play and I'm going to raise my hand to play hooker because you need it. I'm somebody that is a leader in this rugby community, and I'm going to raise my hand to be able to say that I want to lead a conversation or facilitate a conversation, and what are next steps to be able opening up and becoming a more inclusive community, becoming a more, like, aware community.
Right.
And that means that, like, I might have to go up against some friends that I've had for years on end, and, like, that means that I might have to have some really powerful conversations with them. But if we've done everything that we could to really build that trust over the years, this should not be a very difficult conversation, grand scheme,
Right.
because we've already set up the foundation. And so now all we have to do is just be honest with one another and come to an understanding that, like, you know, our way forward is together, not necessarily, you know, apart from one another, but rather, like, you know, we want to be able to see each other succeed.
There has to be a cohesion that comes between it.
Right.
Natural. And the thing is, I think a lot of people sometimes overthink how forced the cohesion has to be, because it's a far more natural than we give it credit. It's like you said, it has to come with that open mind space to be able to allow it. And whether it is positional or whether it is cultural or whether it is even just regional, you know,
Yes.
you're just it just is, all right, how can I open in that arena a little bit more.
Yeah.
No,
and I was just going to say, and I think about, like, how many players are now coming through that are needing that conversation, but don't know how to have it. And, like, don't know how to, like, kind of get into the space where they can have it. And so, like, they're looking to their coaches, they're looking to their mentors.
Right.
But if their mentors or coaches aren't feeling comfortable themselves and they don't know where to go, like, in terms of having the conversation, then you can see easily how the conversation never
gets had.
Right. And so how, like, the energy can dissipate so quickly because nobody's able to kind of, like, really facilitate that space.
Right.
And so that's where, you know, having Roots as a platform and having them as a resource is, like, you know, a dream come true for me, because now it's like I don't have to like try and see who's out there, but rather, you know, I can reach out to you, for example, and say, like, hey, like, do you think this could be a great idea? And, like, you know, we can work it out. And then before we know it, we're on Wednesdays. And, like, we've gotten some players that have gotten a chance to have that conversation, and they're being seen having it, so that, you know, new players that are coming in or new coaches that are witnessing this can know what comes with it and what are some things to expect. And, you know, I've already gotten some really positive feedback. So again, thank you for, you know, allowing us to be on that space, but getting some positive feedback about, like, all right, you guys have energized me. I want to be a part of the conversation, and not disparaging them about, like, well, where have you been before?
And I think that's the part that I think has to also be remembered on that other side. You know, and even throughout this whole George Floyd situation and everything, and while, yes, to an extent I don't understand what's very new. We did this for a decade, but whatever. All right.
Pandemic.
Right. It's like, you got time now. Okay, you got time. I got you. See what's happening. But it's like, you're right. You have to also be as willing to want to accept it, not just for people to accept you and to have that cultural, but to also be able to receive it as well, and receive it forgivingly, as long as it's being presented with good intentions, obviously. You know.
Yeah. And I can even, and, you know, just from doing this work for so long, you know, I think oftentimes, especially as it comes to white people involving themselves in this conversation, there's a certain amount of guilt that can become very crippling for them. About, like, you know, why haven't I gotten involved earlier? But then also, like, what can I do now? And, like, all of those questions are constantly going through their head, but understanding that, like, guilt itself is not really an action step. That is just largely you processing at the moment. And, like, the actionable step is saying, like, what am I going to do with this guilt? What am I physically, like, and mentally prepared to kind of take the next step with? And that could even be like, let me go to somebody that I trust and just kind of talk out like what I'm thinking. But, for some, it might be like, man, that's it. I've had it. I'm going on Facebook. I'm talking to my family that are constantly posting all this stuff that I know affects, a population that I work closely with. And I'm going to call that out. And, like, that's going to be the way that I start the ball rolling. Right. And, like, and everybody's going to come into it in different spaces. But, like, the understanding that, like, guilt doesn't necessarily mean that you are in the space of doing. Like, you're just feeling
it's just
right
you're
now.
Feeling it. Like, it's a good starting point in terms of, like you said, it's a motivation to get things going, but it's not in and of itself the final step.
Exactly. And so, and I think about like my socially conservative pieces of my family and how, like, over the years we've had conversations that aren't necessarily fun for them, and they're not necessarily fun for me, but, like, at the same time I know that they're necessary if they're going to see all pieces of myself.
Data driven, data received.
Yeah. And so, in understanding that, like, I'm having this conversation because I care about you and I care about, like, us and our relationship. And, like, just because we're family doesn't necessarily mean that, we always have to be on the same page about everything, but rather like the component of family that makes it a family is being able to say, like, I'm going to come to you because we're blood related, and I'm going to have this conversation with you because I know that this is going to help all of us. And knowing that, like, we're both going to be better because of it. And these conversations with rugby kind of work the same way. We go on these tours, we go on these practices, we spend endless hours, like, grabbing and touching on each other. So we're super personal with each other. What's one more conversation about something that, could adversely affect me? Like, how can we kind of move into a space where, like, we've done all of these things together. I need you to be able to talk about this one thing. Right. And can you do that for me?
No, I find it interesting because it works in so many matters. So, like, even whenever you talk about, like, the HBCU Rugby Classic in that instance, whenever I was creating it, it was very multi-tiered. Obviously, it was, let's promote HBCUs. We need that to be a presentation. Another was creating that American identity, and because Black culture is inherently American culture. It's American identity, almost top to bottom. But the other half of it was in being able to create this space where you can adjust the way that you're looking at rugby. So it became an instance where it was, hey, instead of us just looking at rugby, because even from a tournament standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. If you do a tournament at its extreme, you're going to deal with basically rock music or whatever, which nothing's wrong with that. You're dealing with your same basic over amount of people, a bunch of teams all paid in, and the essence is just to build around the teams. Like, the teams are the consumers are the teams, and you kind of hope and develop from there. Whereas whenever it was with the HBC Rugby Classic, it was, hey, look, we can also be an upstart into pop culture. It can be an Essence Festival. It can be a Bayou Classic. There, yes. But even on more so, it doesn't have to be player focused. Now, it now means you have the challenge of saying, I got to also find spectators. But in doing that, it means that you have to create culture that is outside what which is what we always are trying to do. We always know there's the rugby culture. We know there's the Black culture. But now let's meld this. Let's actually make it so that the culture is receptive for your own casual viewers, as well as your diehards, so that maybe the players are not needing to pay, and it's now you're coming because you're coming for the competition. But now now means you have to put more value into what it is you're doing. And I kind of had seen that before in Asia, but to the point that I'm making on this is, when you say we're needing to have these uncomfortable conversations, these are these value adds that we have to it. Hey, maybe the tournament is more than just us getting together and having a casual time, but it is us getting together and saying, hey, we're going to have the stage competition. We're going to have the stage conversation. We're going to have this presentation of the teams. But now we're not just presenting it to ourselves. We want to bring everybody into this conversation. We want to let you all know that this is inherently as much a part of us internally as it is you guys, non-rugby people who can now find something in this. And it subsequently creates that depth and development that we have within the game, but that we also go back to have with as an individual person, as the community and as a whole.
Yes. And like, you know, I'm finding more and more people are starting to kind of reevaluating how they're watching sports. I think the pandemic has done, you know, some things in terms of like sports viewership, but I also think that, like, you know, George Floyd has definitely, like, now coming back to Colin Kaepernick's like kneeling protests, it's really kind of being able to see like who actually does see me as for who I am on the field, right? And like, you know, and we think about, you know, black labor in general, but then as we think about it as it comes to sports and how, like, you know, black itself has been politicized over the decades and centuries, and like now how as a black player you're automatically an activist until you say you aren't.
Not right.
So like, you know, when you come into a space, they're automatically already thinking that you've got something to say, where you do get a lot of situations where it's you get the shut up and dribble, or you get a lot of like pushback and like, why are you doing this now and this time? But like understanding that like you're bringing all of yourself into that space.
Right.
And so, and I think about like how like Michael Jordan constantly gets pushed back because like he has the platform to be able to really like bust the like conversation wide open, but how like his silence is also an action within itself. And how like, you know, you want to be able to have players that aren't chasing the dollar to the space where like I have to mute part of myself in order to be able to make sure I'm making money or to make sure I secure this piece. But like rather like getting people into a space where like this is all of me. I'm not putting on airs. I'm not going to change who I am. I'm definitely not going to code switch. I'm just going to be exactly who I need to be. At all and times. Like, and the more people that see that authenticity, the more likely you will find players that will also be authentic. And then like, you know, and I think about like how Roots began like years ago, just kind of like starting off with like meeting Chemo, meeting KG, like knowing Hayden, getting a chance to meet Tiana, like meeting Tiff, meeting Phaedra, Coma, and like getting a chance to really like develop relationships with them, but then also understand that like we don't need to change ourselves for anybody. We can be ourselves at all times, and like anybody else that says different does not need to be around us right now. And like the more that we can bring our authentic selves and bring in authentic people, like bring more and more authentic people that want to be able to do the same thing, the more likely you're going to be able to actually like have a team that's true to you and have a set of players that are true to you, that you will know, like, you know, you're going to go to battle with and are willing to like do everything you can to watch them succeed. And like, you know, my vision here, you know, years down the line is like having the conversation not go into the political sphere, but rather thinking about it in terms of just like from an empathy standpoint. If I'm going to be sharing the field with this player, I need to make sure that I know what's going in and out of their mind.
Exactly.
And knowing that like if they're feeling the effects of watching somebody like George Floyd get killed, they can't just erase that and then walk onto the field. Like they're still going to feel that. And so even though it does not impact me the same way it impacts them, I still want to be cognizant that it is impacting them. And like, don't think that, you know, these things happen in a vacuum, and like, don't think that they're not being affected by the fact that like players are kneeling for the anthem. And I just watched our coach make a statement that everybody better stand for that anthem, or you better find a different place to go. And like thinking about the conflict that they have to be going through at the moment in order to make that decision, that like, if I want to become a great rugby player, then I gotta
hold back.
This block out. Yeah. I gotta block out this part of myself, and like how like that's just inherently unfair.
Right. and again, and it goes back to how it impacts on the field, because now it's another active part of the mind that has to be distracted from what's being implemented there, as opposed to this open free space.
Right. And if I've got, players that are standing by my coach and, I can visibly see that, if you don't like it, you can get out type of deal. Are these the players that I want to play with right now?
Right.
Is this essentially who I'm going to battle with? Is this somebody that, I feel has my back when it's on the line?
Right.
And like, you don't want to be in a space with, time winding down, thinking about those types of questions.
Right.
You want to be able to go in with a clear mind that, like, man, no, regardless of what happens off the field, I know on the field I'm going to be supportive. Like, I'm going to be supported here with my teammates, and then they're also going to want to support me off the field too, and vice versa. And so again, it's really about like rethinking that team culture, rethinking that club culture into a space where it's just like, we do need to think about, the impact of a lot of the stuff that's happening now on our players and on our coaches and like on our administrations, and being okay to be like, being able to just say, I'm nervous, I'm anxious about what this might mean, what it looks like, but I'm hoping that like we can all have an open dialogue and an open conversation about some of these vulnerabilities, and know that like, the purpose of this is to build empathy and trust. And we're all going to walk away better for it.
Amen to that. Dude. Yeah. Derek, bro, I can have this conversation all day with you. Bro.
It's been awesome.
Bro. Dude, as we're winding down, what are the next things that are going to be coming up for you? What is it that you're working on that you're excited for moving into this future?
I think about the website a lot. I think about the work and and how to develop it properly and making it more community based. And it means sitting down, writing up ideas. And for anybody that's been following, I greatly appreciate it. And like, for anybody that hasn't checked it out yet, it's called the Work.Education. But like, it's a space where like I'm constantly thinking about how to add to it. And I like write up a lot of stuff and I throw it out because I'm just like, nah, it doesn't feel comprehensive enough. And it's a lot of workshopping, but like, it's a space for me to really be excited about, because I know that it will help time and time again. And like, for anybody, wherever they are wanting to come into this conversation, this could be a place where like, hopefully once I get that page up, getting them a chance to kind of write about their experience, how they came into this conversation, and then having other people see that write up and are recognizing that there are a lot of similarities with their own journey. And like knowing that like the more people that participate in that website, the less it will be needed to be able to find the resident Black person when something happens, but rather being able to know that like, all right, I have some tools in my toolkit that can help me. And I can now go to this resident Black person that I wanted to talk to, right, and not ask them, what can I do next? But rather like, where can I be most useful? Right. And like, where do you think I can really like be impactful? And like they can and knowing that like they might not have an answer for you, they might not be able to say anything, but they appreciate the fact that you want to be able to put yourself in that space rather than saying, teach me. Right. Like I've taught myself, or I've gone through some literature here and I'm reflecting on that, whatever it might be, to be able to say like, I want to take this conversation to the next level. What are some action steps for myself, and putting the onus back on myself. So that's really exciting for me. Like, the school year itself is going to be anxiety inducing, but still exciting, to be in the space and see the students again, see the teachers again, and kind of like plot out what, the future of teaching is going to inevitably look like. Cause I can imagine it might be a while before we get back to what is considered normal. But rather like, really kind of assessing like, what our priorities are, both as an educator, but then also as a school. And it's going to be an exciting conversation. It's a hard one, but, I think like, a lot of people are in a space where they're growing in different ways over the past few months. And I think, as we start to reopen, we get to see that growth. We get a chance to kind of experience it a little bit more. And, that I think this will be a very interesting chapter to reflect on, even just a year from now, in thinking about, how much we as a country have had to really kind of reflect these past few months, and like really had to sit with, literally had to sit with our own behaviors and really kind of assess what we need to do next, to kind of move ourselves back to equilibrium.
Agreed. Yo, where can people find you at, bro?
So if you guys want to look up on Instagram, it's HOLD_MUH_D, hold my D. And then there's a whole story about that one. That's for another podcast. But if anybody wants to email any questions that they have about racial literacy work, feel free to reach out at theworkproject2020@gmail.com. And I am more than happy to help assist with anything that I can. These are all things that I think anybody wanting to have the conversation about, I'm always there to just be able to say you can do it. I've given this now 10, 11 years of, actual research, being able to do a lot of this work. So I should have gotten my PhD in it.
Get them straight PhDs, bro.
If anybody can, exactly, if anybody has any links to honorary, or at this point, I'm sure Facebook's giving out degrees.
I mean, look, it's getting there. I'm telling you, Facebook is legitimately going to come out with Facebook academics certification for
and as sad as it sounds, just being able to understand that, when folks are coming into this work, I think sometimes they get overwhelmed by how much information's out there, but understanding that you can start anywhere and kind of find your own journey, and that itself is a growth, is the growth mindset too. And so just knowing that there are people here that do want to support you in that. And, I think the more that we get a chance to talk about it in these spaces, even for this podcast, but the more we can do that, the better long term. So.
Yo, I love it, brother. Thank you so much for just being able to take the time and just dropping mad knowledge right now.
No, thanks so much for having me. As always, man, it's funny, we've gotten a chance to really meet, know each other over the summer. And now, we're already just next time you're in New York City, bring me on up.
Look, that's why I need to get you guys also to get down here to Louisiana so I can return the favor. It's always coming up. I need you to come into this heat, all right? Come down.
Well, funny enough, my wife loves New Orleans. So, now with that, invite.
Exactly. Double down, all right? We just an hour up the road. We're not even that far, all right?
Right. And so, I can already see her now listening to this podcast. She's already going to probably be like, well, Derek, this is a part of your professional development. Let's think about, what you need to be able to do to really help yourself grow and learn. So, be expecting to see that email soon enough. Well, I guess we're coming down now all of a sudden.
I'm ready for y'all.
Meanwhile, you'll be like, Derek, I cannot believe that this has happened. Our numerous emails between one another have finally manifested. Great. So it'll be a great shout either way. And, we'll always continue the conversation. But again, I'm now my heart is open because, I've now found another person that I know that I can talk to about this stuff. And
feeling is mutual, brother.
Yeah, so it's the family continues to grow. So, if you get a Christmas card as well, just don't be surprised.
I promise you're only going to see a few thousand tears coming out of that. Right? But not 1,001. I'm just
a few thousand. Yeah.
Just a few, Oh, no, bro.
Yeah.
Thanks,
so much, man. I greatly appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for listening.
Man, that is my guy. That was a great convo. We're definitely bringing him back. There's no doubt about that. I really enjoyed that. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, if not even more. Thank you, Derek, for taking the time to be on the podcast. It was truly, truly appreciated. And look, I look forward to it again. Guys, please leave a review, leave a like, let me know what it is that you guys are thinking. Of course, you guys can always check this out and see more of the podcast. Check out at anchor.fm/GiftTime Rugby or whatever you are listening to podcasts on. You guys can also check our Instagram page at Grow Rugby Podcast. Check it out. Hit it a like. We're going to update things going through there, update into that area, and I definitely look forward to being able to talk more on there. Check out some of our other podcasts. Last week, we had Pat Evans of Front Office Sports. Week prior to, we had the pleasure of having Kelly Smith with American Rugby Pro Training Center. We had Adam Gray Hayward from the movie Play On. We had Jackie Finland on a throwback with Rugby Breakdown. We had Farrah Douglas with Mount St. Mary's Rugby. We had Rashad Lipford, North Carolina A&T. We've had some great discussions with some great people, and it's only getting better. That's the wild part. We're only getting better, and I'm so happy to be able to do this and provide this for you guys. But in the meantime, look, I hope you guys are happy. I hope you guys are healthy, and I hope you know that you are highly favored. You guys have a great one. Take care. Till next week. Cheers.